I see people listening some more.
I don't know if I'm prepared for it, quite honestly, but
I could hold my head up because I wasn't alone.
It's important that we remember
Square crossing the don't buck.
And we will all pitch in and be there for each other.
The loud sound will scare away the evil monster.
So welcome to the Lava Center and ECHO Greenfield. My name is Doug Selwyn. I'm one of the perpetrators of this ECHO event. This is Jan there in the back, and Vanessa behind the camera, and Lindy Whiteman up in the front. And just a word or two about ECHO Greenfield. It is a concerted effort, a coordinated effort by us here at Lava, and hopefully with the larger town, to discover and rediscover our town's history, both who we are, how we got to be here, and to have a sense of how we are making history today and moving forward. So we're doing as many different things as we can, and just getting started with it, to encourage people to explore their own history, explore the history of where they are in town, and how they interact with the town. And part of that is bringing in people to talk about the ways they are doing that work on an ongoing basis. Philippe Simone has been working with GCTV for how long? Ever?
Since 2008.
And you probably have seen him if you've gone anywhere, and there's been a camera. Philippe has probably been somewhere near it, documenting what happens in town here, from town meetings to events in the street, and collecting stories around those events. And he's going to share some of the work he has collected, being both a filmmaker as well as working with GCTV. He's got stories. This man has stories, and he's going to share some of them with us today. So please welcome Philippe.
Thank you, Doug. And thank you for coming, folks. I know it's a very difficult time to come to public events as the City of Greenfield is getting ready for an uptick in the pandemic. People are being asked to wear masks in place. I'm Philippe Simone. I work as a production coordinator at Greenfield Community Television. And before that, I was a production assistant. And through all those years, since about 2013 or 2014, I started doing community coverage stories, which were short stories designed to talk about and investigate to some kind of a depth beyond 1 or 2 minutes what was going on in the community. And instead of weekly or daily news show on television like you see on the network televisions, we basically covered individual stories and put them online. And then at the end of the week, we would compile everything we'd done that week or the week before into what we call GCTV community coverage. Being a community organization, the emphasis was put on analysis and in getting the depth of the story rather than the sensational aspects and the things that were happening every day. However, despite all of that, you have the developing story, which means that I've been doing this for a while, and I've seen and been interested in certain types of events happening in town, or certain types of events just happen, and we would be remiss not to cover them and not to try to find out a little bit more about them. Part of what the developing story shows is a little bit of our history and how, through a process of 10 years, how something very small can grow into something very big. Also, some of the things that I would come across. Well, let me just give you an example. The first series that I'm going to discuss will be about the veterans' benefits and the improvement of the veterans' benefits, not only in Greenfield, but in the whole Upper Valley. And it was the type of thing where I had gone to cover, and I'm actually going to put that on the screen right now. I had gone to cover a Pearl Harbor commemoration. And just be patient while I play with this mouse. I had gone to cover a Pearl Harbor commemoration on the French King Bridge. And I thought that the what they had done with it was really interesting and a good part of history. But what I also found there, in talking to some of the veterans, is that there was a big need for veteran services. There was much more of a need to expand the services and kind of start covering more things. So I became interested in that. Why would I become so interested in veterans? Where I grew up, and the family I grew up in, there were a lot of veterans. About all 6 of my step-cousins served in Vietnam. All 6 came back, and all 6 had difficulties and problems their whole life because they were afraid to talk about certain things. And so I said to myself, if I'm going to have anything to do with film, camera, or community media, I'm going to give a place for veterans to be able to tell their story. And so this gentleman had come in and talked about some of the needs of veterans in the area.
On December 7, 1941, planes from Japan's largest aircraft carriers launched a raid on the main Pacific U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. The surprise attack without any declaration of war became known, as Franklin Delano Roosevelt called it, a day that will live in infamy. Now in 2011, veterans and their supporters still gather annually to commemorate and honor those thousands of servicemen and women who lost their lives at Pearl Harbor, and bring homage to all soldiers past and present who have and continue to serve. GCTV spoke with John Lawton, chairman of the veterans organization known as Rolling Thunder.
The Pearl Harbor Survivors Association has gone from 18,000 strong to under 3,000 now. And it's important that we remember what our country has gone through in the past years. You know, it's important that this is always remembered as a stepping stone to where we are today with our freedom.
Many veterans from all branches were on hand, and many of those who served in World War II were there as well.
We're here to honor the Pearl Harbor survivors and those that passed away during attacks on December 7th, 1941. And a special thanks to the veterans before us. If it wasn't for their braveness, we wouldn't be here today.
GCTV spoke with the descendants of 2 of those who survived Pearl Harbor and went on to fight the war for its duration.
There's John Woodward. John Woodward is also featured on this picture here with his brother Pete. They were both on the West Virginia. At the time of the West Virginia was being bombed, John was on an officer's ship escorting officers back and forth. So that's why he's on this little boat. He's going back to the West Virginia because he has a battle station that he had to report to. In the battle station, he had to put a certain piece of wood on a certain piece of metal to make sure it wouldn't collapse. He ran to the battle station, he went back onto the little boat to pick up people that were in the water. He was presumed killed in this article over here. Him and his brother were presumed killed in action at Pearl Harbor. And on Christmas Eve, the parents were notified that, in fact, the 2 brothers were not killed. The 2 brothers thought each other were killed as well. And one day on the ship, on a different ship, John went into the shower, and as he was in the shower, he heard next to him a person whistling. In a certain song, he knew it was his brother Pete. So they found out that they were both alive in the shower later on at Pearl Harbor. My wife's other grandfather, Hilton Hoover, who's right here, was on the USS Helena. They didn't know each other at the time. The USS Helena was hit by a torpedo and took substantial damage. It was later repaired. Both the West Virginia and the Helena were both repaired. Helena then went on another mission and was sunk by the Japanese. As it was sunk, they abandoned ship, and the crew of the Helena abandoned ship and swam to an island. The island was occupied by the Japanese, and one of the inhabitants of the island told the United States military that the group of soldiers or sailors was stuck on the island. The military then came to the island at the dead of night and rescued their sailors. It was the first time sailors were rescued by the United States Navy on an occupied island.
There are many ways to honor veterans. Making sure they get the proper benefits and access to services and education is what Charles Lovin, Director of Veteran Services in Franklin County, is fully equipped to do. GCTV community coverage visited the Main Street office to find out what assistance is available to veterans, and most notably to senior citizens who are either veterans themselves or the widows of veterans.
And currently in Greenfield, under Mass General Law, Chapter 115, we service 70 clients. Let's see, 49 of those clients are veterans and 21 are widows. 41 of these people are retired, 22 are disabled or have filed for disability, and 7 individuals, or 10% of my caseload, are employable people looking for work. Bring in your Medicare B premiums, bring me your private health care, and bring me your Medicare D premiums and your out-of-pocket expenses, and we can reimburse you for those.
If you need more information, contact Charles Lovin at 413-772-1571.
I did this story, but then I didn't stop there. I didn't just film this and then walk away. I said, what is the current state of things in right now in Greenfield? And so I met with this man, Charles Lovin, and this is the office that he wound up with. But before this office, and I'm just looking for that scene where you see Charles' old office. And if I don't find it, I just want to let you know that the Veterans Office used to be in a small building across the street, down in the basement. And you'd have to go in the back and you'd see like an old sign that said "Park Here." And so there were just some old filing cabinets, and there were also, it was just very old and very small, and they didn't feel like they could do anything with it. So the mayor at the time, Bill Martin, was also a vet, and he was from Vietnam, and I think he really strongly supported that they get a new space. So when the 114 Main Street space opened up down about 3 blocks down the street, they opened a new office there. And they started to really assess what kind of things veterans needed. And
the grand opening of Greenfield's new Veteran Services Center was held on Monday, March 29th. Special guests included newly elected U.S. Senator Scott Brown.
First of all, everybody in here who served, obviously thank you for your service. Everybody here who cares about somebody that served, thank you for your service.
Vietnam Veterans of Massachusetts Incorporated provided the grant necessary to cover the rental and utility costs of the new center. Greenfield's mayor, Bill Martin, himself a Vietnam War veteran, shares those concerns that many veterans have. Now, Franklin County veterans will have a one-stop service center for all of their needs. For more information on veteran services or to volunteer, call 413-772-1571.
Another part of that discussion was talking to veterans. And Michael Lewis, who's a veteran, we talked a lot with him about PTSD and some of the things that veterans suffer. And one of the things that keeps them from, I think, functioning as well as they could, and the lack of the care that they had received as well. And so we followed the story with Michael Lewis. I had another story. This is a Veterans Day where this man here came and talked about peace. And so there was a lot of healing that day as well. There's another story that I had done where Governor Patrick had come in and they dedicated the new space. Then we got a new director, and it shifted from just being from being Franklin County to being the Upper Valley Veteran Services. And one of the things that happened with that group is the focus on medical treatment and on acknowledging veterans' needs, I think has really expanded. And here's the story that I want you to watch and listen to about how the Veterans Center here took on the issue of Agent Orange.
Vietnam veterans and their offspring are welcome to attend a town hall meeting about Agent Orange, taking place on April 22nd at GCC from noon to 4. GCTV visited the Upper Pioneer Valley Veterans Services District to find out from their director why Agent Orange is still a medical problem for many families 50 years after the Vietnam War, as well as what kind of benefits are available for those still afflicted.
Agent Orange was originally designed, as a herbicide for use on agricultural products. Monsanto was tasked by the Department of Defense to develop something that was stronger, to use to defoliate large swaths of land in Vietnam so that there would be killing fields or security around air bases. And on top of that, the military often used it in higher concentrations than what was originally designed for. So the parts per million was very high. And it was soon discovered after it was developed that there's dioxins in Agent Orange and a bunch of these other herbicides that were developed. Those dioxins, once you're exposed to them, kind of attack some of the nerve cells, especially the long nerve cells. Some of that can lay dormant for years for some of these guys. Guys that were exposed and actually had the liquid on them, a lot of them would have a disease called chloroacne, causes rashes. And it would go away, and sometimes it would reappear 10 years later, and these guys didn't quite know what was happening. And then those dioxins stay in their cells, and years later they come down with cancers. There's a lot of cancers that are associated with these dioxins and Agent Orange. Or they may just get prostate cancer, or they may get diabetes or ischemic heart disease, which they're kind of equating with their age, because these guys are in their 60s and 70s, and they're really not making the connection that that dioxin has been with them for 40 or 50 years since they were exposed to it. And another thing that's happening now, and Congress has recently mandated the VA to study, is these poisons, these dioxins, are getting passed down into second and third generations. So there is a few diseases that the VA recognizes that are passed down to offspring of Vietnam veterans, mostly female Vietnam veterans. But the VVA, Vietnam Veterans of America, and other groups have said, well, hey, there's a lot of our male veterans that are passing down these issues. So they've been mandated to do a 2-year study on some of the birth defects. Veterans are being told you should file a claim now. It may get denied today, but as the VA is forced to recognize these, you have an outstanding claim that's been recognized, and there may be some monetary benefit for the family to help take care of a child that might have birth defects. And some of these children obviously were born in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, and they've been forced to live with an issue all this time too. So we're making sure they get the information that they need. And we're seeing just here in our Franklin County area a lot of offspring that were born with heart issues. So the child might have been born with a valve defect that had to get operated on, and now maybe they're an adult and they're living fine with that, but it was a birth defect they were born with. Or maybe they're born with some sort of spinal issues. So, by filing for a compensation like this, one, it can help educate the family to kind of alleviate, maybe this is where this issue came from, was the exposure to the dioxin. And two, if there's some monetary benefit that might be available for them, or some health care benefits, that again might alleviate some of the burden that's been placed on the family or the offspring. So that's our goal. Educate and see if there are some benefits that might be available to help them. The veteran only has to have 1 day in Vietnam to be considered exposed for presumptive diseases. So in Franklin County, we have roughly 2,000 Vietnam veterans. You know, and then when you start to add in Western Mass, that's the area that we've invited, and even further beyond that, you're well into the 6,000 to 10,000 range of Vietnam veterans that had at least 1 day on the ground. So there's quite a few of them. And a large percentage of them obviously are healthy and haven't come down with an issue. But just from what we have coming in here in foot traffic and attending our events, there are a lot of them. The other part about Agent Orange is that by attacking those long nerve cells, it actually it adds to the issues of PTSD and some of the other mental health disorders, because it's attacking some of those nerve cells. That's sign of a side effect that we really weren't aware of before. At the event, we'll concentrate on several areas that we see pretty predominant as an exposure to Agent Orange. One of them a lot of our veterans don't understand is ischemic heart disease. A lot of our veterans have heart issues, and they might fall under that category. So we get a hold of the veteran or the spouse or the offspring. We take a look at some of the diseases that are presumed to have been caused by Agent Orange. If they have one of those issues or one of those side effects, then when we'd file a claim for them, we'd set up an appointment, or with one of the other organizations that are there. You set up an appointment with a claims officer to help you gather the paperwork. They file a claim, and usually within a couple of months, the VA will make a decision and assign a disability rating to that case. And then the higher that disability rating, obviously, the higher the amount of money that the person could get.
Agent Orange, a town hall meeting for Vietnam veterans, taking place April 22nd from noon to 4 p.m. at Greenfield Community College's Dining Commons.
Agent Orange. So there you go. There's where that story eventually led to. I'd love to do more, but I haven't in a while because my focus has shifted a little bit in terms of what I do at GCTV. From a small office to a larger place, to attention from the government, attention from state officials and the governor at the time, and now moving into, I would hopefully say, an appropriate space with a beautiful Veterans History Museum of the history of veterans here in Greenfield that is regularly maintained, and so it's a great place to just stop by, whether you're a veteran or not, if you want to see the museum. Now Tim is here, who's the director of the, Tim, you want to raise your hand? Is the director of Veteran Services here. And what is the, as part of the developing story, how can you update me now?
Well, once Charlie retired, we combined all of the towns in Franklin County into one district. And the space that was down at the other end really didn't meet what we needed. So we moved here to 294. We've got a space that's a separate room for veterans to have telehealth counseling or telehealth medical appointments now. That was our next big step. After COVID came and guys couldn't get to their appointments, we found out, obviously, a lot of our small towns still don't have good internet access. And a lot of our older veterans, didn't want to drive all the way down into Northampton, or just didn't have the skill set to do a telehealth appointment. So we've set that up there now. That's our next big step, was to do that. We've also gone the additional step now where I have one of my staff as a SHINE counselor. If you're not aware what a SHINE counselor is, that's serving the health insurance needs of everyone. So she specifically works with just all of our veterans and all of their dependents anywhere here in Franklin County. So that takes some of the strain off our senior centers, helps them sign up for the proper health insurance programs once they retire or if they're disabled. And we've also gone, the next new step that we just took here just recently, we now submit our VA paperwork directly to the VA. Before, we had to go through the state of Massachusetts, and to tell you the truth, dealing with somebody in Boston who doesn't even know where Wendell is or Warwick or any of our towns are, and they don't even care, there was too many mistakes being made. So we just got rid of the state completely, and we do everything directly to the federal government ourselves now. So it speeds up stuff for the veterans and their dependents, and if it's a mistake, it's on us that time. So we'll own any mistakes that happen instead of trying to get somebody in Boston to own up to it. So that's where we're at today. Bringing the services out to our veterans. We now do satellite hours everywhere in Franklin County, so folks don't have to travel all the way into Greenfield. They can be seen anywhere out in the district, and we'll actually go out to their homes. If they need a telehealth appointment, we've bought iPads. We'll go out to their house and set them up, and they can do their telehealth appointment right there. We'll wait until they're done with their appointment, and then take our equipment and come back to the main office. So that's where we're at today.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
And what you just witnessed, folks, was that process of where you would go somewhere with a camera, ask someone a question, and they would be answered. And unlike commercial television, one of the things that I like about community media is that we don't have like sound bites that have to be over in 5 or 10 seconds. We can let someone really give you the full depth of the story. And I think that that's what makes us valuable in the community and why we enjoy doing it, because we want to do that type of thing. You would be the type of person who gets into community media because you want to either facilitate the voice of the community or because you want to facilitate maybe something of your own agenda. And that's part of where I'm coming from too. You know, a little bit about my background is, like I said before, I'm going to pay attention to the needs of veterans because I know so many of them, and I grew up with veterans in my family. I believe that war is a horror, and that everything we can do to heal the situation, heal the aftermath of the situation, is a good thing to think of as your responsibility. Another thing that I feel really strongly about, personally, is the way that we imprison people, and the way that we don't solve problems, and the way that we sort of lock them behind bars. I also know that there are economic roots through my own personal studies have a lot to do with reperpetuating more and more exploitation, or some would say slavery. And in Georgia, the state constitution, and I think this is common throughout all the states, is that when you're a prisoner, you're a slave of the state. So it is a reversion back to the ultimate form of exploitation in some ways, and therefore very leery of that. And I like to see situations healed and remedied. So I went to the prison, the jail here, the Franklin County Correctional Facility, and I talked to Sheriff Chris Donovan, and I talked to Ed Hayes, who's in charge of programs and activities there, and I said, what do you have for these guys to do? At the same time, I was being contacted by Joan O'Byrne, Trenda Lofton, and I'm sorry, I'm just skipping her name off the top of my head. Reverend Schendler. And they were taking Greenfield Community College classes and programs and bringing them right to the jail. And so my first story with them was with Trenda Lofton, teaching them a play that she had written called When the System Swallows You. And it was a very good and healing thing because it made them feel like someone identifies with them and identifies with the situation that they're in. I continued to pursue this. And because I was pursuing this, and because I said, I'm interested in this, call me when anything's happening, I get a call from Ed Hayes, and he's like, I've got a guy who wants to run the Boston Marathon, but he's in jail. And it's like, but he's going to do it in jail on a treadmill. He's going to get water, he's going to get support, he's going to get people helping him train, and he helps, I believe they got him a better pair of sneakers too. And he did that, he did the whole 36 miles. I'd like you to hear his story.
The Elm Street Think Tank is an educational collaboration between inmates of the Franklin County House of Corrections and educators from Greenfield Community College. Recently, a member of that group, Keith, ran the Boston Marathon from inside, on a treadmill, and without the many advantages enjoyed by runners on the outside.
Like, I didn't put as much into this as I should have, as most people do. You know, I didn't train like most people do. I didn't have the time that most people have. I didn't have any of the, like, running shoes. I had no running shoes. I ran in these long cotton polyester pants, cotton t-shirt. It was all, there's all so much that went into making it harder than, it probably is for a lot of other people. I started out with just a few miles, and I kept trying to run further and further, like every time I ran, and eventually I got up to the half marathon point, 13.1 miles, and that's but up until this, that was the farthest I'd ever gone. So it was hard. I didn't have a lot of time to train between the time I decided on actually doing this and the time, when it started. It was only like a 10-day period. I talked to a lot of the staff here, and there are several that are quite avid runners themselves, and some of them run 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons, and marathons. One of the lieutenants that works here actually has run a few marathons, and so he gave me a lot of advice that helped a lot. Different things I could do and eat to kind of supplement for what people would use or do out there, and so one of the things he was big on was making sure I had some type of sugar to eat throughout, because I apparently burn a lot of sugar while running, and that's the one thing I can get relatively easy in here. Also, he stressed staying hydrated. Try to drink every mile, he said, but don't overhydrate. So that was also a big problem because I had a cup to drink out of, and you can't run and drink out of a cup. So also salt. He mentions I should have some type of salt. Don't eat a lot of it, but at some point during the running, just have a little bit I could just throw in my mouth. The treadmill is actually built with like a safety mechanism in it that will shut off at an hour. Like I said, just assumes your heart rate's at a dangerously high level after running for so long, so it will shut off in you and you lose all your information, your time and your distance. And so to avoid this, I had to actually break the whole thing into 6 increments. I started with a first segment of 5.2 miles, and then a 5-mile segment, and then followed by 4 segments of 4 miles. And so that way I could stop these on my own. We could record the time, and I run the first 5.2, hit stop. A guy would write down my time for me, and I'd immediately hit restart and I'll get back up to speed.
Races in general can be competitive struggles between contestants, but are also, for many everyday people, a way to challenge oneself. Keith explains the importance of this and offers a lesson to those younger than himself.
I don't have anything in my life that I feel I could look back on and be happy about that. Like, I've never done anything significant, nothing great that allows me to think back on and smile and feel like, yeah, I did that, This is a goal that I can set that is, relatively huge, that I'm confident I can meet, So I knew it would feel great to accomplish that, and in the end, I was more than 100% right, It was awesome, when I finally hit that last 26.2 miles, that last little stretch. I sprinted the last quarter of a mile, and it was awesome. You can go as far as you can carry yourself, and you'd be surprised or amazed at how tough human will is, and how far you can get that to go. I know I can take a lot of what I put into that and use it to, work toward other goals I might set out there, because there are a lot of other things I want to do, write a novel, start a small business, and if I could just go into either of those endeavors with half the confidence I had going into this one, I'll be great.
The marathon is 26 miles and 385 yards. Keith ran the equivalent on a treadmill in 4 hours and 14 minutes. His next goal, and on the outside, is to run that distance in under 4 hours.
I think the thing that strikes me the most about this particular story is that it was so important for this person who had very little in life that he had felt that he had accomplished. And he had a sense of accomplishment. And that is one of the things that I agree with that they're trying to do with inmates at the jail. And one of the things that's stressed is find a hobby, develop a skill while you're here. Develop hobbies, develop skills, and so that when you have free time, you're not sitting around wandering off in certain directions, that you have something to focus yourself on in your free time, something to develop over the years. And so as this story developed, Keith eventually was able to get out of jail. And not only did he continue running on the outside and participating in marathons, but he did a lot of writing and working on his ability to write and creating novels and poetry and things like that. And at first he mostly just wrote about kind of like a stream of consciousness about where he had brought his life. And it was a really healing thing for him. And all of this material I have somewhere on a website at under GCTV. And GCTV's website right now is being completely redone. And what we're going to do is we're going to tag things so that if, say, you wanted to know more about this story, you'd pull up all the videos and documents that you'd be able to see. I'm very lucky in the sense that I really have a lot of hobbies and a lot of things that I like to do. I actually like to do more things outside of work than work. So, let's see. So, here he is, a free man.
It actually ended up being the most perfect day for mid-November. It was a high of about 58 and sunny, gorgeous. There were about 119 that ran the full marathon, but then there were probably about 200 or 300 more that ran the relay, so they were with us throughout various parts of the run. Anyway, so yeah, we got down here a little early and took a tour of the course I'll be running tomorrow, and I was not very enthused to find out that it is crammed full of hills, which I don't know if I'm prepared for, quite honestly, but I've been training for the last 3.5 months, most of it on the treadmill, unfortunately. I've had the last 3 weeks to get acclimated to running on the road, which I don't really feel is enough time, but the upside is running on the road is much easier than running on a treadmill, I think. Back in April, the same day they ran the Boston Marathon, I ran it on the treadmill, which was absolutely horrible. So I registered to run this marathon 3 weeks after my release, and I started training for it almost 3 months before I got out. But unfortunately, of course, I had to train on the treadmill. So then when I got out, I had about 3 weeks to get acclimated to running on the road, which I found to be so much easier running on the road. I wasn't sure at the time. I never really got to time my runs out here on the street, but I felt like the running came so much easier. I just had no idea of how fast I was going. I used the app Map My Run and a watch that was synced to that app on my phone, so I'd carry my phone too. It said I ran 26.6 miles, but but they say it was 26.2. So
how do you feel?
Oh my God, dead. Dead.
First 5 miles.
That was awesome. So I finished 15th overall with a time of 3 hours, 24 minutes, and 14 seconds. 15 or 16 miles was inside the Miles Standish State Forest, so so the scenery was awesome, unbelievable. It just was all through the woods. It circled a few ponds. There was a lot of water. I began my training with the goal of getting to the point where I could run this marathon in under the qualifying time to make the Boston Marathon, which would have been under 3 hours and 5 minutes. But about 2 months into my training, I realized I was still far from getting to the point where I could do that. I want to find another one for the spring, preferably a much less hilly one than this one. This one was cram-packed full of hills, and I'd like to find an easier one and shoot for the goal of making it under the qualifying time of 3 hours and 5 minutes so that I could register to run Boston next year. I was encouraged to write a piece about the marathon I ran inside the jail on the treadmill back in April. I did just that, and we sold the idea of running that article to Runner's World magazine, who was interested, and last I heard they were going to run it in their online edition, and it should be coming out very soon, likely within the next month.
20 miles, buddy. Yeah, hang in there.
This was one of my favorite stories to do because I actually see Keith from time to time in different places in Greenfield. And it's a great thing to see him outside and trying to do something with himself. And I don't want to sit here and talk about that so much because I don't want to fault the individual so much for what happens to them. But I would love to hear what if anybody here in the audience has an opinion about incarceration, the prison system, rehabilitation, how to get our community moving again, or if there's something that's recent within this that someone knows about.
I'm just curious whether Greenfield Community College still works, has a program, where they work with any of the students, any of the inmates.
As far as I know, and this was a few months ago, I spoke to Revan and Joan, and they both said that they were doing something there still.
Oh, okay.
And that I needed to get refocused. They were doing podcasting, and GCTV helped them by loaning them some pieces of equipment that they were allowed to bring in. I couldn't give them any kind of equipment that I had. I had to give them certain types of equipment, like a Tascam recorder, nothing like this. No stands or anything like that, and I was really bummed out because I'm like, they're not gonna beat each other, they're not hurting each other in there, and so, but still, there were things to conform to, and then we were more than happy to assist, and so that's what they're doing right now, is some podcasting, some audio storytelling.
It's so interesting, your project or projects with the jail, and I think for many of us, we drive by, we have no idea what's going on inside. We collectively feel kind of bad that anyone has to be in there. We think it's probably not a great life. But for the most part, I think I've been ignorant, and I just am happy to see what you were able to do here.
And it's not easy getting in there. And I had to go through some checkpoints and be searched and have approval, meet with the sheriff, meet with Ed Hayes, the director of activities there, and have them give me the approval to go in. And it looks like any other jail. It's not really a happy place to be. It's a kind of dismal place to be. In terms of talking to the sheriff about it, he hates it because it was built before his whole program of rehabilitation. It was built for a whole different style of incarceration. Sometimes they use the old building a lot because there's facilities there for people to get their hands on doing things, And so I think the dilemma right now really though with the prison system is that a lot of people get training and then there's a lot of money made from the services that they give, but then those jobs aren't available in the outside world because they're all being done in prison. So there's something that we need to take a look at as society, and as I continue to present stories like that, I hope we continue taking a look. Anybody else have anything to say, a question? An opinion?
I'm pretty ignorant. What types of jobs are being done in the prisons that aren't being done outside?
So there's in the larger prison systems, there are a lot of packaging and boxing jobs and small production jobs for major corporations, and why they do them at such a lower cost that they're able to become much more profitable companies using prison labor. So Microsoft, for instance, has a lot of its products made in prison. And so, and you know, like if anybody buys a computer, you know those are pretty expensive. So if the prisoners aren't making the money, then someone else is. And as much as I want to see education, like let's give prisoners a real education. You know? And I should stop with my own opinion and let somebody else contribute. Anything else to say about incarceration?
Well, you know, from experiences that I've had with them, it seems like a lot of the folks that we see repetitively in and out, it's a mental health issue. It's not always an addiction issue, or the addiction issue was they became addicted to overcome a mental health issue or to try to deal with a mental health issue. And that seems to be where a lot of these guys are coming from. There is no more institution to put folks that have mental health. They believe in halfway houses, but most of the places where someone with mental health issues, it's voluntary. So if mental health issue isn't being treated in there, they're going to be right back here, addicted, or back in there. So it's not just the drugs. The drugs were because of something. And a lot of these guys that we've been dealing with, they have mental health issues. And I don't know if they're really addressing that in any of the prison systems properly. I mean, I know there's prison psychiatrists and there's social workers, but once they check that block and he does his 6 months, he's out, the follow-on services, I think, are lacking because it's voluntary a lot of times. They got to check in with the probation officer, but, you know, is a condition of the release requiring them to see mental health practitioners? I don't know.
I do know this, and when I spoke to Chris Donnellan, I know that what he's trying to do, and this was a few years ago when I did interview him, what he wanted to do is set up a program that was all-inclusive. So you're nearing the end of your term of being incarcerated, you're going to get your, or even when you get in there, you're going to get your drug rehabilitation, mental health evaluation, mental health needs taken care of, and then upon exit, you're going to need the training, some kind of training that says you can do certain types of jobs, as well as assistance with finding a home to live in, assistance with income and transportation, like who's going to be your doctor, who's going to be your therapist. And quite honestly, the last place I saw Keith was at my therapist's office. And so we both had the same, we were both in the same place. 2 different lives, both in the same place. And so that I think is a really good idea, because what you have to consider, like what you said, is that people are just in and out because they're not getting the services that they need on the outside. So to keep them outside, they need those types of services. Yes?
There was a...
Could you come closer?
But not very close.
Yes.
There is a series in town on housing and housing issues and dealing with housing for especially low-income folks, and many of the issues that people who are struggling with housing.
Perfect with the subject. Sorry.
I know. I was thinking that too. What people are dealing with coming out of prison or jail very much matches what a lot of people are dealing with who have nothing to do with jail, which is there aren't support, there is no low-income housing, or very little. We have thousands of people needing places to live where there aren't those places available. And jobs and services and supports and transportation, all of those needs, our entire community has that need. I think the prison system maybe is more dramatic in terms of a little more extreme for people coming out of prison, because they also have prison on their resume. But a lot of those issues of how do we deal with people who have needs, whether it's food or clothing or shelter or any of that, it's a much broader issue than just prison. And so I think focusing on prison highlights it, and I think it's really valuable in making connection to the larger issue, I think is also something we maybe find a way to do.
So what you're saying is that there's a larger issue and a more generalized view of how society functions, that perpetuates prison, as well as the things that the poverty that it perpetuates for people who are in need of housing and things like that.
Well, and the fact that we have that housing is a commodity at this point. right? It's something that people make money off of rather than something that is available to people because we're alive and we should have houses and we should have food and we should have all those things. Instead, it's capitalism, of course, but it's if you can make money off it, we'll provide it, and otherwise, not so much.
I'm with you.
I've got that shirt too.
Yeah, we're in the same tribe. So, and this is a common theme, Doug, that you hit, and it's like the more I talk about the lack of support that a lot of us feel we've had through COVID, in terms of the government helping us stimulate the economy. Because if I get the money, I'm spending it right here, you know, or maybe a few things from Amazon. But there's a lot of people right now who are business people, bank presidents, regular working people. We're all having the same idea that maybe there's some things in our society that need to be not-for-profit, like some of the basic needs that we need. So the people don't drive the economy so much, so hard, or are forced to drive so hard, drive themselves and the environment so hard, producing the amount of wealth that you need to make to just simply have these basic necessities. So this is something I'm going to be focusing on probably in some future stories. Anybody else?
If I can have a second turn.
Well, you certainly can, absolutely.
It's a very small thing perhaps, but I'm reminded that 25 years ago when I was volunteering for the Literacy Project, I had a young man who was a student of mine, and I worked with him. This is in Amherst. At one point, I was helping him with his reading and writing, and at one point, he told me, my brother is in jail. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And I said, well, let's write to him. Do you want to write to him? Can we write a letter? And he said, no, I'm not going to write to him. No. And I said, oh, but can you imagine what that might mean to him if you wrote to him, if you took the time? He said, he doesn't know how to read. So it stopped me dead. I never would have thought that.
There's a lot of people like this.
Yeah.
And I can tell you this, that will make you happy. This will make you happy. Every year, and I hope it's still going on, GCC, Gary Longe,
I know
used to
Gary.
be the director of the media technology department, and he had a program, and I think they're still doing this, but through somebody else, where they go in and the inmates are filmed reading a bedtime story or like a Christmas story, and then the DVD gets mailed to the family, and then the children can see their father reading them a bedtime story, or greeting them or talking to them. So there's no need to write, but I think that is, if anybody here wants to help in a situation like that, finding if there is a writing program through an educational facility for the local jail, then please get involved, because people love that, getting mail and hearing from people. I've talked to them. They would be so grateful to get a letter from someone they don't even know, you know? So that's a really good thing to bring up.
So we've gone from the community to the nation. Well, when you really look at it, China has about 6 times as many people as us, and they have less prisoners. And so when our diplomats go around the world and discuss human rights, at this point they're now a laughing stock, because we have the most prisoners per capita, not only per capita, but the most prisoners in the world today. So it does nothing for diplomacy. We have this kind of injustice in the society.
The way that we view ourselves is very often different than the way that others view us.
Yes.
And I think the developing story can show us some of that. And also, we do stick out in the world in terms of the way that we incarcerate people en masse, you know? And it just goes to show, well, I guess I could just ask everybody a question. What's the most intensely capitalistic country in the world? US, raise your hand if you agree. Well, case in point. You know? So where the intensity of profit needs to be made, the pressure to put people in jail needs to be made. One of my favorite films, and I'm going to go back to film now, it's a true story. It's a story of Robert Elliott Burns, and it's from the book I Was a Fugitive from a Chain Gang. And it's about a man who did very little and wound up on a chain gang and wound up like there for years and years and years. And the abuse, the hostility, the discipline, the low budget, it's all, and the long working hours and the deprivation of conditions, the lack of good food, bathing facilities, and the punishment is because they needed to create things for the county and build things for the county, but not really spend a lot of money doing it. So there was always a pressure to go out there and get someone put in jail. And so whether or not someone had actually done something wrong became second to just the need for them to be in a facility like that and be what was called in Georgia at the time a slave of the state. Doug?
Could you talk a little bit about if somebody wants to put together a story, if they want to investigate or collect a story in town, what kind of process do you go through to do that?
Sure, I'm glad you asked that, because that's exactly more of what I want to talk about in my own opinion about the world. I would really love to train anyone on the use of a camera, on the use of audio equipment, how to set up an interview, how to set up a story, how to create a proposal for production, and all the training for the editing as well. And maybe some insight onto how you can actually interview someone. But I would invite, and this is why we exist, is not so much for me to make these films, and I've done this to train myself, but my job really is to train you and train people in the community. I think one thing that I don't see enough of is young people. And it hurts me because I wonder, how are you going to get the training to go into one of the most lucrative industries in the world, which is television and media? And even though we have COVID, television is still one of the top employers. And so we give this education and we urge people in the community to take advantage of it. I can't always get people to do so because they're interested in being a filmmaker, but if there's a issue or a topic that really upsets you or really you feel charged and passionate about and you want to do something about it, I'll show you how to use a camera. I'll teach you how to interview. I'll teach you how to edit and to create a finished product. And you know what? It'll be easy. It's not that hard to do. There's just a few things you have to remember. And then that's why we, as part of the developing story, have producers come in and we develop them throughout the years. I want to move on to my next subject, which I think is one of Greenfield's biggest subjects and one of America's biggest subjects. As it struggles with class, we also struggle with race. And there was an event that happened here, well, I think it was in 2013 or 2014, that started the whole filming process for me. And there was the son of a police officer, of a police detective in Greenfield, had flown a Confederate flag in a very visible way in his garage. And his neighbor, who was a man who had a male partner, who had a child, a young black child, saw this, and the child saw this, and the child was totally horrified because of what he'd been hearing about, you know, the history of racism in America, and quite naturally so, quite duly so, horrified at the sight of a Confederate flag in his neighborhood, right across the street from his house.
People wanted to have a protest, a standout, to contradict the idea that a lot of people supported the police officer flying the Confederate flag. And you know, many people feel the Confederate flag is a symbol of racism and a symbol of slavery, and that we shouldn't, we don't want to act like Greenfield supports that. And, not commenting on the police officer himself, we feel police have to be held to a higher standard. If they hold personal feelings of racism, then they can't serve the entire community. At the end of the Civil War, that Confederate flag continued to mean that. And I think if we look at the history of the Civil Rights Movement, you see the people who opposed the Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 60s flying the Confederate flag. It stood for racism. It stood for segregation. And it still does today. When you go to the websites of racists and segregationists, they have the Confederate flag flying. But it means death and murder to African Americans and other people of color. And I think we can't forget lynchings were done with people flying the Confederate flag after the Civil War. And so it's not just a benign symbol, it stands for violence, murder, and racism. Racism isn't just individual feelings. You have people being individually racist. We have to look at, racism in housing, people being denied housing. We have to look at people being denied jobs. So when we talk about institutionalized racism in this country, we have to look at the lending practices of banks. I think, it is heartening to see in this area that the police and the mayor have reacted quickly on this. Compare that to Chicago, where, after the murder of that young black man, it was covered up for over a year. I think that's because we have an active community here that people won't let it stand. I think we do have to go further, though. I think to ensure these things don't happen, we really have to talk about that police who hold individual racist feelings just because they hide it and don't hang the Confederate flag can't be allowed to be policemen. We have to look at that. And I think we have to set standards for when police can use force.
Doing this, all of this, I think it's good because it shows that some people are still brave and they're still the audacity to come out here to come and do this without any problems. And Greenfield's letting them do it with peace in mind. So I think it's good. I think it's perfect.
I think it needed to have a quick response, to be honest with you, and I don't think we're done yet either. We're certainly not done talking about it and not done working on it, and it's obviously an important subject topic, not here, everywhere, and I think it required a lot of reflection, and I think it was important for us to. It was important for me anyway to reach out to those folks, and especially that young man, and just let him know that, we are here for him. I'd hate to have him ever think that I wasn't going to be here for him. And obviously I'm going to work hard to continue what I've done for the last couple of years here and get out in the community with everybody and welcome them in and continue to do my cups and coffee and talking with people and just continue that type of work, because I think this is extremely unfortunate, but I do think it needs the attention that that it gets, and I understand it. It's not. I just wanted to stop out today and say hi to some folks and let them know that. Well, I'm here to say hello. Obviously, I'm a police officer, so I'm not gonna,
I think the people in Greenfield, all of the people in Greenfield, those who are our legislators, those who are our businessmen and town leaders and people in general need to be open to having a conversation about racism. Ignoring it, hiding it, not talking about it, not being willing to deal with it only creates that vacuum, allows it to be more insidious. We socialize our children to that. Children are not born being prejudiced. They learn that. So a conversation needs to be had, and it needs to be had by all. And sure, it's painful, it's ugly, nobody wants to look at it, but if you don't take the Band-Aid off, the wound never gets the air to heal.
The discussion came up during the election, and I'm glad that we started this conversation. I'm not glad of what's happening now, but I think the important first step is to have the conversation. But you make a good point. It's not something that's going to attract people or businesses to our town if this is the reputation we have. What I think that today is about, though, is not necessarily a protest or pointing fingers. I think it's important for us to raise awareness. People may do things without any harmful intention, but we do have a responsibility as a member of our community to take a step into the shoes of others and understand that maybe what we're doing, what we're saying, can affect someone and really hurt them. So I'd like to look at today and the gathering today as more of that instead of, again, pointing fingers or making labels, but more just let's raise awareness and let's just try to be a little more concerned with each other.
So what followed this was 4, 5, 6 years of Not in Our Town stories that Karen Miller did. I followed up with more stuff coming from All Souls Church, where they had vigils, they had classes. They wanted to understand what white privilege was, what advantages we have, how racism works, and how to give all that up in order to participate in an effective way. There were other stories about any of the events that occurred. And then, however, for some reason, I don't know why, but the racism didn't end. And it didn't end here, and it didn't end in the United States. And so it went on and on and on and on until a man had his neck stood on and died in the street. A horrible way for doing basically nothing. And it just enraged everyone. And so, although everyone was as enraged as they were, our response was not violent. Our response was peaceful and by numbers. And so in June of 2020, Greenfield witnessed the biggest event that it's ever and the words of Chris Collins, who's one of our leading media journalists and television personalities, and runs the organization at Frontier Community Access. He said, "I'm so proud of you," because he was on our board of directors then, "for being here with the crew, with the film crew, because this is the biggest thing that's ever happened in Greenfield." And there were thousands and thousands of people there, and they marched peacefully to the police station and had a speak out, had people laying on the ground. Everybody was able to express their horror, their reaction, and where their love, their center of their love comes from, too, by all of us being together. And then we heard the stories of people who grew up in the community, stories that we never hear, stories that many people would just ignore or disqualify. What a horror she had to live with in school. And yet she made it to becoming a businesswoman in this area, and a mother. And so we had a lot of this this day. A lot of people get to talk about their experiences, and that to me is a form of healing. So this was quite a long speak out that was followed by a march. And there's the march. And this is in front of the police station. And actually the police here had cordoned off the front of the police station and actually wanted people to come into the parking lot and have the rally, but everybody stayed in the street, which I thought was even better. We're going to pause this for just a moment and ask anybody to talk about what they know about in terms of Black Lives Matter movement. If there's any update anybody has in terms of where it stands with the kind of policing that we're going to have, and where it stands with police brutality today.
There's going to be some sort of big march on Washington because seems like our Congress and our president isn't really pushing forward with the voters' rights bills, the two of them. And it's scary to me. I grew up in the 60s and no demonstrations. I'm old enough to have known, I see Detroit burn, know about Newark, Watts, I could name them off because I remember them. And I remember going to Detroit, it looked like something out of World War II. And it seems like there's people that want trouble. And it scares me a little bit to think about a big Black Lives Matter demonstration in Washington with what happened January 6th, and with the atmosphere in this country the way it is. It seems like there's a section of our population that wants trouble now, possibly thinking that they're in a better, a more superior position now than they may be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whatever. But at any rate, it frightens me.
There's that concern, yeah, with what we saw happening January 6th, was it? Yeah, at the Capitol building, when people were basically allowed to almost infiltrate Congress without any kind of challenge, without a serious enough challenge. And so that is very alarming. I have the suspicion, though, that if you were to come out with a demonstration or a march to Washington for the benefit of peace and brotherhood and love and against racism and against police brutality and for a better society, so many people are going to want to be in there. Whereas this activity that happened was a very forceful activity, but it was orchestrated by a smaller group of individuals. And at a time when they kind of had the support of the government. And I think that's what scared me the most, is that Trump was saying, oh yeah, you can go ahead and do that. You know, oh, let your whiteness be known, you know, and things like that. Those little things that he says, you know, it's okay to say, you know, whatever. And, you know, it's okay to, you know, expect women to be subservient to men. Things like that. And even posed in such a way that is benign and a joke. It goes so far, and it creates what I would say a severe problem and a severe danger. It is a very unsafe thing to do for the President of the United States to even say anything like that, because then it turns into murder on the street. It turns into, it's okay for me to beat this person. I'm a police officer. The President will support me on that, and so on and so forth. So a lot of those things that we have encountered over the last administration, it's going to take a while to undo, you know. And I would love to hear more from either Baki or anybody else about what can we do to undo that. You know, we have COVID now too, so it's really hard. There's an extra layer of fear in terms of people doing things in the public eye.
I don't know, people aren't talking. I know people that are very conservative and people that are very liberal, and I don't see the two of them talking. It seems like people don't really want to really bridge the communication gap. It's easy to talk among ourselves if we are on one side, or on the other side to talk among themselves. But I've never seen the communication break down so much in my life. I was around for the Vietnam War demonstrations. There was a lot of right-wing people that were anti-this and anti-that in terms of the demonstrations against the war. And when I grew up, we had a lot of conversations. Mm-hmm. We had real conversations about being tied to the buck and the United States supporting capitalism and fighting communism and all that kind of stuff. Real discussions. I don't hear any discussions right now. Just the people you agree with, you discuss it among yourselves, and the other people, they discuss it among themselves, and it just seems like there's a real gap. There's a lot of gaps. There's a generation gap that's unbelievable. You know, where are the young people? Not only here, but where are the young people and what are they doing? It's like a lot of separation and schisms.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you brought that up. That is stunning and extremely, from my perspective, true. How do you think community television or community media can help? You know, that's what we're looking for. How do we get the community activated in that kind of a discussion? You know, and you're right. I mean, a lot of people are just like, if someone says the wrong thing, everybody just turns away from them. And I really think that, like, if someone says something, they should be challenged, not in an aggressive manner, but in some kind of discussion. Because the most beautiful thing to me to see on earth, and the thing that I see, and because I look for it, I look through history, I look through film, I look through literature, and I look through real life. But to see the transformation of people is the most beautiful thing you can see. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do the developing stories, because you see the transformation of the community. And then I'm just going to finish in what I have to say. To challenge the racist is perfectly appropriate. I urge everyone to do that, because racism is weak and it has no real basis in science. And it can be challenged and challenged and challenged. And if you can show people how it affects them negatively, which it ultimately does, then I think that they can understand and they begin to grasp a little bit more about where all of this is coming to. And then one day they just say to themselves, well, that's ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense. I really like that guy. I really like my neighbor. I don't care where he's from. I really like him, you know, so I don't know. What am I supposed to think? And that's where all of you come in. This is here's what I try to think about, and here's where I'm coming from in terms of why I enjoy multicultural and multi-ethnic and I hate the word race, so I'm not going to say it, but multi-tonal interests and things like that, people.
I was just going to add that in this community, at least, we are fortunate to have Greenfield Community College. I'm about to turn 70. I still take classes, and just the climate at GCC. I haven't been inside the building for a little while now, but with the students, it feels like they're really doing a good job to advocate for this type of understanding and anti-racist type behavior.
So for people like Baki who are thinking, like, where is everybody? A good place to find them may be Greenfield Community College.
Well, it's one. I think it's one of a number of places, but I'm optimistic. I continue to be optimistic, probably too optimistic, but I think that's the only way, by going out and being me, by saying, my first husband was black. I remember he got into the state police and was assigned to Shelburne. What did the other policemen do at Shelburne? Someone would repeatedly put in his locker pictures of black women as a message. So, yes, but I feel that these are pockets of individuals who just don't understand, who have some kind of irrational fears.
Or they think it's the real solution. Someone taught them a long time ago that if they're feeling bad about their own life, they should just look at somebody else as someone who's inferior to them. Right. I think that gets taught and inbred as a solution. And the Trump administration, they just did a lot of that. They said, oh, you know, the economy's shot because of immigrants, or it's actually shot because of the rising amount of profit that companies make, the lower wages that people get, and the fact that they don't get taxed very much, you know. So there's a lot of scapegoatism to serve certain purposes, and I totally agree with that. And, you know, I also just want to say that if anybody from this group or knows anybody younger, as you were saying, oh, and by the way, the people who I saw protesting the most before the Black Lives Matter movement hit Greenfield was when your daughter was a student at Four Rivers. And I don't see them that much, but they're kind of special like that. We do have some kids that are really motivated, but because they're students, they have a lot of other interests. You know, they're young and they want to have fun too. But let's see what we can do, all of us as a group. Let's make it a mission to get some young people into Greenfield Community Television who want to document social justice events in Greenfield, that want to take on a project that's a question in their mind, and they can answer that question making the film. Did you have your hand up? Or?
No, but I agree.
Black power?
No, I agree. I think we've got to reach out to the young people. The whole generation gap thing is not healthy for our culture, our society, a person. It's just not healthy. Technology has something to do with it, and sending everybody to these brick buildings called schools and separating them from the rest of the society is another thing. Like with my daughter, I homeschooled her all the way up to 7th grade. That means, and I'm not an educator in that way, but I brought her with me everywhere I went, to the grocery store. If I had to go buy something, her grandparents, taking all of them shopping or anywhere, just to have her see what it's like to be part of a community, aside from learning how to count and how to read and all that other stuff. And she's doing quite well. There is a social problem and a cultural problem here with the way we separate our generations and separate our people. And that's true in Greenfield, and it's true probably everywhere in this country, but it's something that I see in Greenfield here, and I really see how there's a beautiful community here, and young people should know old people and learn from them. It's the natural way.
One of the most beautiful things I remember in my life, my lifespan, is Jimi Hendrix, a man who took the Delta blues from the 1800s and early 1900s, mixed them with electricity and modern rock and roll, distortion and effects, and soul, and created the type of music that nobody else has ever created since. It was a revolutionary
Star Spangled Banner.
And so when a new thing sees an old thing, the explosion in creativity is incredible, and that's how our DNA works too. That to me shows me that there's been some work on the part of society to undermine that process. I hear from younger reggae musicians, "Oh, you play old school music." And I said, no, this was actually written in 2021 by Chronix. It's a traditional root style. It's not old school, And what if it is an older type of music? What if it's an older film, a black and white movie from the 30s? All I know is this: I have 100 years of music and film, popular music and film culture that I can sort through and find what I need. And so I want to invite the youth of today to do the same, to learn from the youth of yesterday, to learn from the adults of yesterday and today, so that they can bring the future forward for tomorrow. And so I think it's all important. I used to watch as a child. I was born in 1961. Most of the movies I watched were made in the 50s and 40s, and I love them. So I don't have to have something that just came out yesterday and has a million technical effects, And so we've done that. We've dazzled them, and we've lied to them in a way that has distracted them away from researching and developing the analytical powers of their mind. And I want to see more of that. I was lucky to go to a high school that focused on teaching us how to think and analyze. And that's a skill that I've had with me my whole life, and has brought me into some incredible places to do things and to be able to pick up skills that I never thought I could do before. I want everybody to have that opportunity. And I want the young people today to be liberated, so that we can together show them what we know from the past, what they hope for the future. We'll work on it together, and we'll get it done. Anybody else have anything else to say? I'd like to just say goodbye to everybody and thank you all for being here.
We've got like about 5 minutes.
Sure. 5 minutes?
It can be a little more, it can be a little less.
Well, does anybody have anything to say? Any last comments?
Does GCTV have any specific relationship with the audiovisual programming in Greenfield High Schools and in Greenfield Schools? Has that connection been made at all?
We would like...
We just had an online screen festival that we did, and there were a number of films that were done by high school students, both from Greenfield High School and from Four Rivers. Have those populations connected with you, or would they?
So we, every year we have a training where we teach the kids at Four Rivers for their final film project how to use a whole bunch of different types of equipment, audio and video. And as far as the Greenfield Public Schools go, Brendan Leowolf is their more than capable video teacher. We cross paths a lot, but we don't collaborate very much because he's got a lot to do every day, and I've got a lot to do every day. And it's nice to know that he's doing that and I'm doing this. Where I come in terms of school is I do a lot for the sports department. And I get a lot of games filmed so that the kids can, especially during COVID, where the kids and the parents couldn't even come and see their kids play. And they were able to watch them online. And they were thrilled. They were just so happy about that. The film, the Greenfield High School Film Contest will be given to us, and we'll put it together and we'll air it on GCTV. So we collaborate as much as we can, and I'd love to collaborate more. But a lot of times this has to do with budget, and this is the one thing that the previous administration left us a legacy of gutting community television when they changed a few certain regulations. And we have to admit the fact that cable is on its way out. A lot more people are getting internet services, and we're going to be a part of that. You know, we'll continue to make content, and we'll continue to broadcast it, and we may have some more effective ways to do so in the future. GCTV is located at 393 Main Street. Our phone number is 774-4288. You can look us up online, gctv.org. We're right next to the Chamber of Commerce. We're right across the street from the old library, and not too far from where the new one will be. And we welcome anyone to just stop by if you're curious, or just give us a call, shoot us an email, Philippe@gctv.org, and I'd be happy to hear of any of your ideas and help facilitate you in filming projects. And that goes for the Lava Center too. If as an organization you need to do something, then you're welcome to access us 100%. I love this symbiosis that we've established here, and I hope it continues.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I see people listening some more.
I don't know if I'm prepared for it, quite honestly, but
I could hold my head up because I wasn't alone.
It's important that we remember.
Square crossing the dump up.
And we will all pitch in and be there for each other.
The loud sound will scare away the evil monster. So